Welcome to Blueprint to Billions, Leverage and Legacy in Apartments.
Welcome back to Blueprint to Billions, Leverage and Legacy in Apartments. I'm host Evan Mack, joined by legal expert and community advocate Terry Bruner. Today's episode explores the silent forces shaping HUD deals, from unspoken rules to hidden red tape, and what they mean for developers, teams, and the communities we serve. Today's episode is Unspoken Norms and Invisible Red Tape in HUD Projects. Terry Bruner, sir, welcome back.
Thank you, Evan. Good to be back.
All right. So what are these silent rules of the game, in the space that no one puts in writing, but everyone is just expected to know?
Okay, number one, you're applying for a federal government backed loan or insured loan, right? So here's the unspoken rule. Developer, investor, you're coming to us on the public dole to help you with your project. So have some respect. No, I'm just kidding. So the piece of it is understanding that you are asking the government for something.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're coming to them hat in hand, but if they're asking you for something and that request is reasonable, you need to understand that you have a responsibility of sorts to try to comply with that to the extent that you can. I think that's part of it. I think the second piece of it, which is really kind of what we hinted at in our last episode, these processes are, it's not like they are, inscribed in a tablet from some mountain where Moses comes down from the mountain, right? They are changeable, they are malleable, they are processes that undergo tweaks, but someone still mans those processes. And it's unrealistic to believe that just because some federal bureaucrat is sitting in an office someplace in Fort Worth or Denver or Atlanta, that everyone knows the rules and knows the requirements in the same way. So there may have to be a little bit of finessing, a little bit of hand-holding, a little bit of, hey, let me tell you how we've done this in the past. Now, you may want to do that or you may not, but understanding that in a sense that, that they could help you could help them sort of move this along or move the ball along. That's important. It's really, really important. And so not taking an obstinate approach and not taking an adversarial approach to the government when you're dealing with them, it's important. It's very, very important. Now, obviously, there is a point in time where you may have to push back. And that's why someone like me and our team is here, is to do just that. But understanding, again, the basic rule is you're asking them for something. And it's just like going to mom and dad, if you ask to stay out beyond your curfew, let's not get all up in a wad because mom and dad are asking, where are you going?
Yeah.
What are you doing? I think that's it. It's as simple as that.
That's amazing. That takes me back. That takes me back a few years right there. Boy, what do you think? You better be home when these lights turn on. I'm like, oh my God. All right, mama.
Takes me back too. Yeah, it takes me back too.
So in your experience, what's not being said in rooms that should be, when it comes to, how communities are actually impacted? I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand about this kind of, like, the communities in general. You hear different things, but what's not being said in these rooms?
Well, I'm gonna take it a slightly different way because I think it bears in the question. There is this notion, I think, that everyone in America at some point wants to own a house,
right?
2-car garage, white picket fence, 2 dogs, and 2.3 or 2.4 kids. That may or may not be true. And I think, particularly with, with the millennial generation and Z and Alpha and all that, I think those norms are beginning to change. And so one of the reasons why I suspect that the apartment business has been booming over the last 20 years, if you're in any market of scale, it's in large measure a reaction to that phenomenon, where it very well could be the case, and I know this from my own family, younger family members, who are in their 20s and whatnot, and they will say, look, I don't have any real interest in owning a house. Maybe they want to own a condo, or
they don't think the same anymore. They don't think the same anymore. Like, as far as like what they're, the pursuit of happiness, it's like it's different.
Exactly. No, you're right. And so I think what's not being spoken in many of these rooms is that there may well be a shift underway where the way in which we live in America, and this is like not just in the urban core, but just generally, the
Mhm.
way in which we live might be different. And those differences might drive different housing solutions and housing offerings that frankly just wasn't true 30 or 40 years ago. And I think from a developer standpoint and from an investor standpoint, really understanding how that plays into the overall scheme or paradigm of
Right.
multifamily property ownership, that might very well impact a lot of what happens, not just from a policy standpoint, but from a practical standpoint.
Wow. Does ego ever play a role in slowing down the progress? And how do you?
No.
No, no, no. How do you neutralize that without kind of escalating conflict?
Well, conflict on some level is just a part of the process. It's a part
Right.
of the game. Um, Look, I'm a big proponent of just calling a spade,
Mm.
and that means being honest. That means communicating. It's sort of like what my wife and I talk a lot about. Communication has just been like such a bellwether and just such a blessing and a bulwark in our marriage. And I think it's true universally. We have to have very difficult conversations, not just with HUD and lenders around this. We have to have some very difficult conversations, frankly, with a lot of our clients. And a lot of times that does go to ego because, if you're representing someone or even if you're partnering with someone and they've done 20 deals before, but they've never done a HUD deal, and you have to have some conversations around, hey, I know you're experienced, but you're not experienced in this thing.
Hmm.
And so a little humble pie may go a long way to getting what you want at the end of the day. And really just having a real nuanced conversation, and then sometimes a very direct conversation around, what do you want? What's your end game? What's the goal? And if this is the goal, it's sort of like a math problem. The fastest distance between 2 points, it's not a circle, it's a straight line. So let's just follow the line. Let's be linear about this.
Nine times out of ten, when deals start to stall, what's the real issue in your opinion?
Well, I think it's so there are probably two that I see most consistently. And obviously, this is not universally true for everyone, but it's based on my experience. And it really boils down, I think, Evan, to communication and execution. Okay. And what I mean by communication, part of it is having frank, open conversations with the parties that be, but a lot of it is also about frequent conversations as well. You can't have a conversation once and then that's the end of it. You have to communicate constantly throughout an entire process and really being open about, where the breakdowns have occurred, where there are stall points, where there are issues, that come to play. And you can frankly probably apply this to any realm of any process, not just the process that we're talking about in terms of HUD, but
Right.
even internally. Like we have to have very honest conversations around what we're doing wrong and where our shortcomings are. And so I think that leads to the execution issue, really being focused on what it means to execute in a way that frankly gets to the deliverable. I'm tongue tied today, but you've got to get to a deliverable. And the only way you're going to do that is by executing. And sometimes deals bog down because someone hasn't done something that needed to be done,
Mm.
or because someone thought someone else was doing the thing that should have been done that was never done. And so really really having a developed process, some systems and some processes that get to who does what by when,
Right.
that's important. And then really being able to measure on all levels if things are actually getting done in the way they need to be done, which speaks to the point of execution.
What do you see behind the scenes though that no one outside would believe is actually happening during these projects? You know what I mean? Like when you finally see Oz, you know what I mean?
I'm gonna be really honest with you, Evan. There is a prevailing thought that every developer is liquid in terms of their balance sheet.
Right.
Every developer, that every investor has millions of dollars to deploy to every project. You would be shocked by sometimes the amount of baling wire, duct tape, and any number of other non-sticky glues that could be used to try to get deals done.
Right.
And I think that's probably something that if more people understood, I think one, it would encourage more people to actually get into the game. but I also think it would force people to be a lot more realistic around what is actually needed in terms of partnerships, in terms of just overall, development, paradigms for how in which things get done.
Mm.
So I'll give you an example. We've had a few clients over the years who have come to us, and they will ask us very frank questions around, hey, what is HUD looking for in terms of money? And so, when that question comes up, I know it usually comes from someone who may not be as liquid as they would like to be.
Okay.
That's not in and of itself a deterrent to doing a deal, but it just means that you've got to go leverage partners who are more liquid. And it means that you then have to bring other things to the deal. So maybe you're not the money guy, maybe you're the development guy. Like maybe you're an architect, or maybe you're someone who understands, community, development and relationships, so you can go out and cultivate great partnerships on the ground. Maybe
Mhm.
you're someone who just owns land and you're contributing land to a deal, so that you could, once you acquire one piece of property, you could effectively try to build, a second phase or another phase. All of those things come to bear, but you've got to be honest around where your strengths are, and actually what do
Right.
you bring to leverage into a certain transaction.
There always seems to be maybe a spoken or unspoken tension between mission and money. Where do most teams get stuck, and how do you move them through to get through it?
Well, they get stuck on money. So
Mhm.
that's where they get stuck. I mean, now I've been fortunate to represent, a lot of nonprofit developers over the years, and theirs is the mission, but it still comes back to money. In their case, they don't have enough money, and so they're trying to figure out how to get more money to do whatever is necessary. In the case of most, for-profit developers, they're looking at dollars and cents. And again, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I want to be very transparent about that. There
Hmm.
is absolutely zero wrong with that. But understanding that if that's the only motivation, the minute a property sort of falls into, disrepair or some sort of issue, that's probably not going to be enough to sustain you through those lean years, because you've made a calculation just on the immediacy of, whether it's a monthly income,
Hmm.
or some sort of, cash on hand or immediate return on investment that may or may not materialize. And hey, look, the economy is cyclical, right? So we've gone through ups, downs, and every place in between. Back in the pandemic years, I was doing a lot of refinance work, and obviously the reason is, there was no shortage of cheap money out there. So when interest rates are, lower than 2%, and if you own a building that, initially had an interest rate of 6%, why wouldn't you go get a 1.9% loan and take that money out and do whatever it is that you want to do with that? But obviously, we're not living in those times now, and so you've got to be able to assess, from a money perspective and from a long-term investment perspective, when those lean years come, how do you balance it out with a more robust year? So if money is just the only motivation and it's not tethered to anything else, you're probably going to run into longer term consequences, some of which
Hmm.
are unintended and negative.
If someone asked you to design the ideal legal framework for a community first, like HUD deal, what would you build differently from what we have now, or do you feel like our infrastructure is all right where it's at?
Well, so there's the base level legal part of it, right? So there's some things that are not going to change. So there needs to be a single asset entity that owns a building, and that's usually backed by other kind of investment money. So that's probably not going to change. But what I do think needs to change from a community standpoint is there needs to be more engagement. There needs to be a real conversation, with, for example, city council members or local civic clubs and local neighborhood associations around what does this neighborhood actually need? And if we purchase this particular, apartment building, for example, what are some things that we could do to more integrate ourselves into the community, so that we're not seen necessarily as just kind of an outlier, or worse, an outsider? And look, I think most of us understand this concept called NIMBYism, not in my backyard. There is a there's been
That's
long yeah, there's long been, a thought that when apartments come to a particular community or neighborhood, there goes the neighborhood, there goes the community. And I think maybe 50 years ago, some remnant of that was true, and I'm not going to say that it's not true in some respects now even. But what I do see, like where our office sits, for example, there's a senior housing facility literally right across the street from our office building. It's not a cheap building, and the people who are living there are not without means. And I think just having some sense of what that looks like now in a community perspective and from a community standpoint, I think that's going to be accretive to very smart developers and investors going forward in the longer run. So I think really just having a better sense of how do you better leverage community resources, and how do you better leverage all of the things that a city, for example, may be offering, that a neighborhood or that a community, a civic association might be offering, doing that in a way that makes sense. I'm not saying it has to be universally true in every single deal, but there are certain entry points in every community that need to be explored. And I don't think, in my experience, that that's been done nearly enough.
So why is it important for developers to understand, political and interpersonal nuance, not just compliance, so to speak?
Well, so in the HUD world, for example, I tell one of our attorneys here all the time. There's the technical side of what we do, which is the legal training, right? There's also the soft part of what we do that no one's necessarily going to teach you. You have to learn it as you engage, as you have time on task. And so the point here being that when you know that there are people involved, and when you know that there are people behind certain processes and things, you need to be able to talk to them as though they are people, because they are. You need to be able to partner with them and collaborate with them, because that's what most of us want and most of us value. And you have to be able to do that in a way that makes complete sense for what you're ultimately trying to accomplish, either for your own investment or for your client or for whomever. And I think that's part of what sets apart the firm that I've built, because we're huge on relationships.
Right.
You could probably go get any real estate attorney to figure out how to do a transaction. But there are very few of those attorneys who are going to amass, or who have amassed, the kind of relational capital that we've built over the time, over the years. And that matters. And so people come and go. Yes, the government changes here and there. But what remains, though, is how you engage with those particular persons, how you engage with this big, large elephant that's sitting out there. And it's like a big ship, the old metaphor, you can't, it takes so much time to turn a big ship as opposed to a dinghy. Those systems don't just change on a dime. And so you've got to invest in them from a relational standpoint to make sure that you're getting done what you need.
So what's the one thing every project partner should internalize before they enter this space? Is it those personal relationships? Is it that soft side? What do you think it is?
Well, I definitely think it's the soft side matters. It matters a whole lot. I think the other piece, though, is really doing their due diligence, doing their homework, making sure that what they're buying or what they're trying to build actually makes sense, both on paper and from the perspective of where you're building it. So, for example, if you're in a residential community, and it's all single family, all single family homes, you probably don't want to go build a 300 unit apartment complex if there's nothing like that around. Like, most people don't want to be the first adopters in that kind of a situation. That's not saying that it couldn't support it. Maybe it could, but you probably want to be a little bit more delicate in that example. So really just kind of understanding the lay of the land, understanding where you are, and then having, I think, the wherewithal to go out and partner with people who have the kind of soft relational skills necessary to get things done.
Mr. Bruner, thank you for your time, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to Blueprint to Billions. Visit terrybrunerlaw.com to connect with Terry and learn more about creating community-centered compliant housing deals. Be sure to subscribe and share if you found this episode valuable. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.